So this is probably one of the biggest names in the fitness industry that I've had on here since I brought Dean on. Somerset. Dean Somerset. Sorry, Guido. Um, there was a lot of cool things discussed in this episode, and a lot of people got shout outs, as what typically happens in a podcast. So you're going to have to check it out. And I'd really appreciate a 5-star review or a nice happy smiley face in a DM, something like that. It all goes a long way, even if it helps me sleep at night. You know, every little bit counts. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Lifestyle Chase. This podcast features high performers who have found a way to live their best life while balancing their health, wellness, friends, and family. Proudly hosted by me, Chris Little. Without further ado, let's get started. All right, so welcome to episode 51 of the Lifestyle Chase. I am joined by the one and only Kyle Dobbs. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's an honor to have you. You're bringing up the street cred of the Lifestyle Chase quite a bit. You're someone who stands out in my eyes as being very humble. Like you have fitness professionals that give you testimonials on your website that like I look up to, like a ton of people that vouch for you, and you kind of your trophy is the effect that you have in people's lives. That's what I get from my perspective, and that's what attracts me to having you on this podcast. So it's an honor to have you here.
I truly appreciate that. That's very kind. And yeah, I've had the opportunity and pleasure to work with some really great people, some really talented individuals. So it's been a blast.
Awesome. So take me through your day. Like what does a day for you start with?
So I work from home. I work remotely right now, and that's been a big change for me over the last about year and a half. And I wake up at 4:15, and I go to the gym and train early. And I typically do this because I want to get back home in time for my kids to wake up. And I've got a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I like to eat breakfast with them and kind of play with them in the morning and spend time with them before they get off to their day. And also, sit down with my wife and drink a cup of coffee and talk to her as well. So everything's kind of geared around that time at home, between work and play and kind of all those things. And I usually drop the kids off at school or camp right now. We just started kind of the summer session, and then I'll usually have 6 or 7 calls. I work, like I said, for myself. I run a mentorship program, and I also consult with a few facilities. So I typically have anywhere between 5 to 8 calls a day where I'll run a Zoom call similar to this one, actually. And I usually start around 8:30 or 9 o'clock and around 4, pick the kids up from school, and I might have another one afterwards. I usually make dinner because my wife's not coming home quite yet, and we usually sit down, have dinner together, and play a little bit, get the kids ready for bath, or take a long walk outside before bed and get them to bed. And then I'm also in a master's program right now, so I'll usually do some schoolwork at home before I go to bed, around between 8 o'clock to 9:30. And I usually try to get in bed at 10. So it's a pretty full day, but it's all very fulfilling as well. So
That's a good solid routine. I want you to think back to a time in your life when your routine was the furthest from that, in a way that felt draining or you were tired, and like what time in your life was that? What were you doing? What was life like? Paint us a picture.
yeah, so my wife and I moved to New York right out of school. She worked in fashion and got a job opportunity out there, and I was just out of school with my undergrad and a CSCS, and figured I could be a trainer just about anywhere. So we went on an adventure that ended up lasting almost 12 years. But the first really 5 years or so, I was working 7 days a week. I was getting up at 3:30 in the morning and starting my day at 5, and usually getting home from work around 9. And I was young and I didn't really know any different, and was really exhausted all the time. But it was, again, I was working with clients, I was training a lot of people, and I was successful to the point, especially financially, that masked a lot of the kind of physiological and psychological issues that I was probably having at the time. And when I kind of got burnt out on that, I ended up going into management and development and doing some other things. But that was definitely a point where, we were young. We were in the, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and we were just, really fighting to make it. And we went through a lot, and we didn't see each other as much as we probably would have liked to. But at the same time, it really strengthened our relationship. And there's a big camaraderie, that kind of took place with my wife and I as we were going through, the quote unquote grind, right? And it was something we definitely needed to do just to survive. And looking back, I'd do it again. I might plan it out a little better and try to work a little more efficiently in some aspects. But I've worked with a lot of trainers from a management perspective and a development perspective over the years, and I do think it is a it is a situation or a period in the career that everybody kind of needs to go through. And we kind of build our lives around contrast, and expectations are set by our perception, right? And if you never go through a time where you kind of hit lows and you're working really hard and you're working a lot of hours and you're not necessarily happy with where you're at still, it's really hard to appreciate the times that you are. And I think back to those days a lot, and when I was basically sleeping from 10:30 till 3:30, and training 8 to 12 sessions a day at times, and working Saturdays and Sundays, usually till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and still trying to be a young person in a busy city and enjoying myself and enjoy my time with my wife, and trying to start a family later on. And uh, that context gives me a lot of gratification and a lot of gratitude to what I'm doing now. And it also helps me differentiate and prioritize the different things in my life, when it comes to family and work and my own individual free time and growth, right? And for me, without that experience, I wouldn't be where I was. I can safely say that. And I would, and if I was to somehow stumble upon where I am now, I don't think I would appreciate it as much. Um, so, long story short, there, I guess.
I like that way of framing it. Just you don't know what you have until it's gone, but maybe invert that. You don't know what tough times are unless you've experienced tough times.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to know what kind of a person you were in high school. Like, were you a jock or a nerd, or what was your high school experience like?
So I played sports. I've always played sports, and I played sports through college, but I was also a 4.3 GPA student who took a lot of college credit hours and throughout high school, and did very well academically, and probably better than I should have without really trying, because it didn't teach me some of the work habits I probably needed throughout my undergrad, and from a time management standpoint. But I was very introverted. My circle of friends consisted of my teammates. I wasn't super popular. I was actually picked on a lot as a kid. I was extremely skinny, and I was good enough at sports that I played up a lot. So I always had older kids to kind of beat up on me a little bit, and that was hard for me, especially being as quiet and probably soft spoken as I was at that point. And I was, uh, but I was persistent, and I kept coming back and I kept trying. But yeah, high school for me was a bit of a blur. Like I said, I wasn't very outgoing. I wasn't super social. I was very, very introverted. I focused on school, but probably not to the extent that I should. And everything kind of revolved around basketball and track at the time. Not a ton of friends, just really my teammates. Like I said, I wasn't super outgoing, but I still had a good time and still enjoyed the process.
So, what's something that you consider the biggest obstacle of being an introvert?
I think energy management. For me, especially in the fitness field, it's very engaging. And this is, it comes with a lot of the work that I do with trainers and consulting, as well as I do a lot of behavioral analysis. And I look at environmental and behavioral preferences and how that matches up with actual role refinement within companies and within somebody's organizational structure. And for me, especially, I can engage and I can do so well. I can kind of fake it a little bit, but it's very it's very cost high. From an energy perspective, it definitely drains me, and it definitely leads to me needing more recovery on the outside of kind of that social context. And typically, I need uh, that 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 recovery to be done either alone, or at least we do a lot of things as a family with people I'm very comfortable with and settings I'm very comfortable with. And we go on a lot of hiking, and we do a lot of things just together. We're a very kind of tight knit group. And if I'm out all weekend going to barbecues and going out with friends and doing some of these other things that are more social, I don't really truly recover based on the environments I'm in. So for me, just the energy consumption that it takes to work with different people continuously all day long, and the type of engagement and individualization that the communication actually requires is something that I'm able to do at a fairly high level, but it's also very draining. And recognizing that within myself has really shaped the way that I plan my time outside of work. And it was definitely something that, in those earlier years we talked to previously, was something I felt but didn't really understand, you know? And now I have a much better grasp on it and kind of understand a little more of what drives it, where it comes from an autonomic standpoint, especially, and psychological standpoint. So I can kind of change my perception of it, and maybe control it, and plan for it, organize it at a little higher rate. But that's probably the biggest thing.
Can you identify like a moment in time when you really realized that that was something that you needed to have control over?
Yeah, I think it probably came later than it should have. My career has been in a lot of different realms within the fitness industry. I started as a trainer, and I worked into management and development of a single facility, and then started overseeing multiple facilities, and then switched into a director role for a few different companies, and oversaw large staffs and lots of locations nationally even. And I was working a ton of hours, in my last position, and my commute was extremely long. And I was living out in New Jersey. We'd moved out to the suburbs at that point, and I was commuting into the city every day. And I was leaving the house around 6 and getting home between 8 and 9 most days. And just that was a big wake up call to me. Just being in the city in general for me was a huge drain. It was, it's so stimulating on so many different levels for someone like myself that it actually caused me and kind of provoked me to move myself and my family halfway across the country back to the Midwest about 2 years ago, because I was just to a point where, from a stress standpoint and from a regulation and coping standpoint, there wasn't much more that I could do. I was extremely unhappy with my quality of my life, and my ability to be a husband and father, and not just a provider, right? There's a lot of importance in all those things, but I definitely wasn't fulfilling at least two of them to the capacity that I really wanted to. And that's something that I've always really been proud of, is that I do consider myself a husband and father first, and a professional second. And I've really tried to organize my career around that, and shape the way I do things around that. So yeah, I really think about 3 years ago, probably my first trip down to Costa Rica to Ben House's retreat, I met a lot of individuals who were outside of my bubble, and it was very refreshing to hear about what they were doing and how they were doing it. Because when you're stuck in the New York environment, hard work and long hours is really martyred to an extent, and very persona. And it's kind of the personification of a successful person is we kind of argue about how miserable we are and how many hours we work, rather than how successful we are sometimes. And I was kind of in that cycle where I was very happy financially. I was making great money. I was in a position where a lot of things were going right from an outward perspective. But I had just, I mean, personally, I had overwhelming anxiety, all the time. I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't able to be present when I was home because a lot of the things that were going on at work and a lot of the responsibilities that I had. And even the weekends, I was, stuck on calls and checking my emails and doing things that uh, really should have been secondary or even not even on the task list, when it comes to weekends. And um, I just wasn't happy. And it took me, again, contrast, that magic word and talking to people outside of that environment to understand that that's not the way it has to be. And after being in that environment for 12 years or 11 years at that point, it's really easy to fall into the trap that, everybody's doing it. And that's kind of the social and environmental norm, within probably all big urban areas, but definitely New York. I think people are drawn there for that. And it's kind of a requirement, and, uh, but yeah, that really changed the way that I looked at things and really started the ball rolling on, making a plan to get out of it.
Yeah. During that time, you talk about the trip to Costa Rica, and you would have met different people. Are there any, like, say, two, three people that really stand out in giving you that perspective, or people that kind of left you with something that resonated?
Yeah, I met a lot of people from the Austin area. I think Ben's originally, from that area from college, and so he's got a lot of buddies there. And talking to someone I consider now a good friend, Dave Rasco, was very refreshing for me. He's a wild guy, but he definitely does things, in a way that I admire and has priorities that I think are, really solid. Mike T. Nelson was also a guy who was a very big influence on that for me. He's someone that works almost exclusively remotely. He's also one of the smartest guys that I've probably ever talked to. So he does that very well also. But that kind of changed my perspective on being able to support my family and provide for them and also have a fulfilling impact on the industry and to be able to do that from a remote standpoint. Ben himself is a uh, major role model of mine when it comes to that. And he's somebody that I think he's taken a lot of risks and then worked extremely hard for them. That's something that I admire a lot as well. And so, I mean, that there's others involved there, and there's people that are business owners and people that run remote locations, and um, I've been down there several times since, and every time I go down there, I meet more new people, and I think it's a special place that draws a very special type of person, and there's really no one down there that I've met that I don't have a lot of admiration for. Like Michelle Boland's another person that I met down there and become very good friends with. That just someone who's extremely humble, but again, one of the smartest people I've ever met. Just seeing how some of these people that are extremely intelligent, extremely successful, and how they interact with everybody else, and in such a just humble and kind of serving way is very inspirational to me.
Yeah.
So it's a great place, great group of people.
I like that. I'm a big advocate for, like, people first, or if you have a chance to sort of learn about people, it's so valuable. Like, we might think that we need to be working on things that make us money, but sometimes just like interacting with the people that are like right outside our front door can be incredibly impactful. Do you
Mhm.
ever think about what your life would look like if you hadn't met those people that you talked about just now?
Yeah, I think I'd just be stuck, stuck in the same cycle, and I probably wouldn't be happy, but I probably wouldn't be as aware of it, or aware that there was a different way about doing things, and that's a big thing for me because you just don't know what you don't know, regardless of what scope you're talking about, and I think the more experiences that you can immerse yourself within and the more people that you can meet and try to learn from, the more options you end up having, right? And that allows you to kind of model out different plans for yourself from an organizational standpoint as well. And And yeah, I mean, the concept of working remotely or even moving back to the Midwest in general had never really crossed my mind. That was never part of my family's plan. And it turned into a great opportunity and something that was scary, but something that also forced me to kind of act and step outside of my comfort zone and create something that was mine, after working for other people for so long. So it's pushed me in a lot of ways, and I'm definitely thankful for it every day.
Totally. And really when it comes down to it, like the things that are the most rewarding, they're often pretty scary, are they not?
Yeah, yeah. I think, you know, it's funny. I talk with people a lot, every day. And one of the things that the themes that keeps coming back is, human beings by nature need stress, right? We need stimulus. And if we don't have enough of it in our actual lives, we'll seek it out, right? Because we'll become bored and complacent. We'll find new challenges and new things to do often. And there's several different ways that you can look at challenge. And I probably, had I not interacted with these people and gone to this event, that I probably would have just kept seeking out challenges within my same bias, right? And just kept kind of digging the hole deeper. But having the immersion of kind of novel perspectives and different ideas and different ideals, right? Methodologies has kind of shaped my thought process on uh, what challenge is, right? And for me, continuously challenging myself in an area that I was successful in, well, that's not necessarily as much challenge as it is probably validation, right? But looking outside of that and seeing maybe where I can raise my floor, where I can develop new skills, where I can work into different scopes of practice, that's a challenge that I see as being very beneficial, right? And kind of outside of my own confirmation bias, right? Can I be an entrepreneur? Can I do something I've never done before, rather than just going up to the next level of the organizational chain within a corporation, right? Those are two very different things, and have yielded very different results from a lifestyle perspective for me, and just an overall happiness perspective. So I definitely think that challenge, stress, stimulus, however you want to describe it, is absolutely necessary to do great things. But I also think that understanding and being objective and critically thinking about where you're going in life and what you actually want to do, and not just working really hard towards any result, is also going to be very beneficial, because there's nothing that really saddens me more than seeing people work really hard towards something that either doesn't matter or might actually be detrimental to them, long term. Because the effort's there, the intent is there, the focus and the direction just might not be in the right place.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thinking back to your journey in high school, like grades came pretty easy to you, like you were academic. Um, what was a moment when all of a sudden like the floor came out from underneath of you, like you couldn't all of a sudden just excel, and how did that feel like?
That definitely hit me in college. I was a double major, biology, chemistry. So I was a pre-med major at the school I was at, and I was playing, sports as well. And it was very hard for me to manage the time, and and try to have a life, try to have friends, try to have a social circle. It was my first time away from home. And I kind of cruised through the first year and a half to 2 years with a pretty good GPA, just because a lot of those were primary courses. And then as I got into kind of the deeper stuff, your organic chemistry, organics too, and and upper physics level classes, and uh, my grades definitely began slipping. And that was something that was very challenging to me, and I probably didn't take it seriously as I should have at the time when I was actually applying to my graduate program that I'm in now. My GPA wasn't high enough, right? So I had to take the GRE, and I had to write a letter about why I deserve to be in this program, 10 years after graduation, with a GPA that wasn't where it should be. And that was a big kind of shock to me, right? And um, looking back at the time, again, I just wanted to get out with my degree. I kind of had a plan of what I wanted to do. I knew after my second year that I didn't want to go into the medical profession, and 7 more years of school and a lot of debt wasn't something I was necessarily interested in. And I had kind of fallen in love with training at that point. I'm the classic oft injured athlete who fell in love with weight training instead because I had turned out to not be as good at my sport as I probably wanted to be. And classic story, right? And 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 it was definitely just I kind of had a plan that I was going to just be a trainer. I kind of fell in love with that process and probably didn't take school as serious as I should have the last few years that I was there. But it came back to bite me a little bit over the last year when I was reapplying to graduate programs.
How long did you spend thinking about it when you realized you'd have to write a letter to like pursue your goal? Like, did you sit and brew on that for a while, or was it just a quick, ah, shit, write a letter?
Yeah, probably option two. I just I need to get it done, and I had no problem explaining my story and explaining my motivations behind doing what I'm doing now, and that was luckily they accepted it and had no issues with it. I wasn't so far below the line that it was a huge red flag, but it was definitely a flag, and but yeah, it definitely made me kind of think back, and to think back, about how decisions you don't think much about at the time can definitely cost you a lot moving forward. And those things even typically will amplify themselves over time, if you let them. So uh, it was a good shock to the system, a little kick in the pants to just go ahead and get it done and apply then and make sure that I got into the next semester as I wanted to.
Yeah. I think a lot of people can kind of talk themselves out of like pursuing a further goal because they hit those moments and like they start talking themselves out of it because it's just like it's a point where they have to stop and like gather their thoughts or stop and reorganize because some people think that they could just go back to school, everything will go well, there will be no problems. They hit a problem and they're like, nope, nope, can't do it. What kind of
Yeah.
advice would you give those kind of people in those situations?
I think it's just to finish, again, we often let our environment, kind of dictate our perception of things. And when you're beginning something and you're happy about it, it's kind of like a client's fitness journey, right? When they're signing up for training and they're ready to invest, like there's a moment in time right there where they're passionate about what they're going to be doing and kind of the world is their oyster, right? And they've got all the hope and all the faith that they're going to succeed with what they're going to succeed in and whatever their goal is. And 2 months down the road, maybe sooner, maybe 2 weeks, right? All of a sudden becomes very hard, right? Getting up early becomes harder. Making it to the gym becomes harder. Making sure that your nutrition is where it should be becomes harder. And I think just going back and understanding, why you started the journey in the first place is always going to be an important reminder as to why you should, continue on with it. Because difficult things tend to change our perception of how valuable the results are going to be, right? And if it was important to you at one point, then it's probably important, right? And I don't think we should let our current situation, our current circumstances dictate, kind of the value of the future outcomes, right? And that's where kind of making a plan, organizing it, making strategies, making systems is going to be very valuable as far as keeping you on track, and something that I work with, kind of the people that are my clients now is that kind of urgent to important continuum, right? Where you can map out, the things that are going to be just consistently important and the urgent things are always going to pop up, but you need to just get them done and not let them disrupt the actual process of getting the long game and meeting that future goal.
So, with having said that, can you identify a time in the last 12 months where you've had to look at like your process and your end goal and your vision to sort of like rekindle the fire within you? Because people have things that happen like all the time that can be discouraging.
Yeah, I mean, it's as I've been, starting my business, I think that's just been a continuous process, and I make a lot of plans, and I kind of test them and I get feedback and I try to be, objective and critically think about, whether or not there's value in what I want to do to an actual demographic or consumer base, and I think that's been a constant process of what my business has eventually evolved into is I definitely set out with wanting it to be one thing and found that through many trials and errors and conversations and feedback mechanisms that the things that I'm truly passionate about and the things that I want to drive and I want to differentiate myself in the industry with are not necessarily valued at as high a level within the industry as they are with myself. And I've had to kind of change my language and change my message and change my own systems various times throughout this process to make sure that I'm actually meeting the needs of the people that I want to serve and the people that I want to help, and instead of really just kind of looking at it from an outside perspective and trying to identify things they need help with, right? And along the way, I might be able to sneak in some of those other processes, but I really need to focus early on, at least, on what's on their radar. And again, conceptually, all of this really ties in with the client, right? We have goals, needs analysis. They have their goals, we have their needs, and you've got to compromise and kind of meet them in the middle. Oftentimes, to gain adherence on any given program. And with this is the same thing. Is I had to really examine whether or not the things I found important were actually important, or whether I just saw value in them based on my own bias and my own experiences in the past. So that's been an ongoing process.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's helpful for people to hear that because there's going to be a lot of people that you're their mentor. Like they gain a lot of knowledge from you, and people look up to their mentors, and they're thinking that that person never has anything that they have to think through. And so that's why I like to talk about that on my podcast, because it's empowering or encouraging or whatever it is for other people to know that they're not like just in their own boat on their by themselves with one paddle spinning around in the lake. Like
Yeah.
everybody's going through the same shit just at different times.
Yeah, I think never in history and until now we have probably the illusion or delusion that so many people are doing well and we're not, based on social media and some of these other things, and just that kind of this misconception that everybody out on social media or wherever is just doing that much better than you are, and nobody's kind of fighting those same struggles that you are. And when in reality, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of people who are fairly successful throughout my weeks, and everybody's dealing with a lot of the same things, and everybody has a lot of self-doubt, and I think again that's part of the process. I think the self-doubt and the you could always be doing more, those voices that we kind of deal with and kind of nag us all the time. We're kind of taught to shut those off, right? And always be positive and always be optimistic and kind of be happy with what we're doing. But in reality, I think those are the things that are going to drive us to do better. And I think changing your perception of what that is really what's going to drive success for a lot of people. I think those are actually friendly voices for the most part. And I think self-doubt is probably actually a good thing, even from an evolutionary perspective, right? It's just another form of stress that's going to move us into action to improve upon our own systems, strategies, thoughts, organization, whatever. And I think that's a big mechanism for growth if used the right way. And even when you look at it from an autonomic standpoint and a stress response standpoint, that stimulus or that stress, we can look at it from a challenge perspective or from a threat response perspective. And depending on how you perceive those things and those voices is really going to dictate how well you actually perform within those environments. And so I think understanding and being aware that those voices to continuously improve aren't necessarily bad, right? And you shouldn't necessarily just kind of swallow them up or quiet them as much as possible. But in reality, they should push you forward. And everybody is going through them, regardless of how many followers they have or how much money they're making or whatever you see out there. It's just, I think that's a common human trait. For anybody who's successful, I think they battle that voice a lot.
From my perspective and my own life experiences, I've learned that like money is so little of what provides absolute fulfillment. Like, I literally split my income in half jumping into the fitness industry. Not that that's the way it will always be, but just that that's the way it's been for me like the last year. And
Mhm.
I've been genuinely happier. And it's just been about people. And in saying that, I can imagine that a lot of people that are in the fitness industry, they want to live a life where they're feeling fulfilled, whether that be they're raising a family or whatever. But for yourself, did you always see yourself being like a family person? Is that something you always pictured for yourself?
It's definitely something I always hoped for. I think professionally, it's something I've always prioritized. But yeah, growing up, I had, a wonderful example. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home with, two parents who loved and respected one another to a very high degree and set a very great example for my sister and I. And that's something that, I will always carry, right? And that's something that I always try to personify as well as a father myself. It's very important for me. Uh, Probably the most important thing in my life is to, I've got two young boys, is to set an example to them on things to value and how they should treat people and how they should interact with people. And that's something that I take a lot of pride in, and they're fantastic kids, and that's probably what I'm the most proud of in reality. And money is great, but money's a tool, right? If you don't clearly define what you want or how much time you want to spend making money, it's not going to bring you the satisfaction that you kind of hope it will, and oftentimes. And I think the actual prioritization of time and understanding what those priorities are and how money can help you with them, but not necessarily will dictate their outcomes, is going to be a very important thing for most people. And there's been plenty of studies that talk about there's X amount of money that somebody can make where their happiness levels actually start leveling off, right? And it's kind of one of those things where you also hear the money doesn't buy happiness, but it can provide opportunities, right? It can provide tools. And I think money is a valuable tool, especially in society as we know it today. But it's also important to understand that it's something we made up as human beings. It's an imaginary construct. It's paper and metal and doesn't actually hold value in and of itself. We've assigned value to it, and it's really the time that you spend trying to make it and what you actually do with it that matters the most.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when it detracts from people being interconnected with other humans, then it gets scary. Like social media and like scrolling through, and you don't actually know anything meaningful about the people that you're watching, and you're clicking like, and it's like you don't know what life is like behind the scenes. You're not fully invested. And I'm a big advocate for just shooting the shit with as many people as possible in the week, because
Yeah,
it's healthy. It's great.
yeah.
I'm curious what your story is with how you met your wife. Like, is it a cool or romantic story, or just something traditional?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty traditional. We met through friends, and uh, as introverted as I am, she's actually just as extroverted. She actually approached me at the bar we were at, of course, because we were 20 years old, but and started talking to me. And I honestly, I don't know if I ever would have even had the courage to approach her had it been the other way around. So I'm glad she did. And that's but after that, it's a pretty traditional story. We just started hanging out, and we got to know each other really well. And she's my best friend. She's probably the person that I admire most in life. I see the hard work that she's put in with uh, her career, and then as being a mom. And those are things that you just can't really quantify. And we moved to New York because she had a great opportunity. And she worked for 5 years, and once we had kids, we made the decision. She gave it all up, to be a mom, and to be passionate about raising our kids, and that was a huge thing for our family, is to have her raise our kids rather than somebody else. And again, that's a luxury. That's something that not everybody gets the chance to do, and we're very thankful that we had the opportunity to do it. And now that they're a little older, she's gone back into the workforce, and now she's crushing it at the job that she's at, and she's right back on track. And I just see the amount of work that she puts into it, and the amount of work that she puts into being present and being a great mother when she's home. And that's something that for me, uh, I'm thankful every day, right? And it's something I definitely looked into, and I think I kind of outkicked my own coverage in a lot of ways there, but she hasn't realized it yet, so I'm pretty happy with it.
So I find, and I'm no expert on this stuff. Like I'm just a bachelor, but in the conversations that I've had, when it's like a close friendship, a relationship, anything like that, there's something about the other person where you kind of have to meet them where they're at, or be have an escalated sense of awareness of what their needs are. And I imagine when you were going through your most stressful time, most burnt out time as a trainer, she would have had to meet you where you were at. And like, how did she make that work for you?
Yeah, that's actually that was a big part of our early relationship because we moved to New York. Um, we'd been dating for about a little over a year at that point, so we really jumped into that process and didn't know each other that well in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, I mean, us being almost completely different, personality types and having different preferences, New York was like her dream. She loved the energy of the city. She loved interacting with different individuals on a daily basis. She worked in fashion design, and then she worked for Condé Nast within like media. And that was, the stimulation was something that was very exciting for her and something that she loved. And she didn't feel it the same way that I did. And that was something, man, before I really had an understanding of what was going on, and obviously her as well, it was something that, we struggled with because I'd get home and I just need to just sit on the couch for a while, and zone out. And I'd be a little bit of a zombie and kind of non-responsive, unintentionally, of course, but it was hard for me to really focus on something. I just needed to decompress. And she'd want to talk about her day and my day and all the exciting things that were going on. And I think, for us, a lot of it was built around just communicating, and being open enough to have that conversation and saying like, hey, when I get home, I need to sit for a little bit and I need a little bit of space to just get myself right, and kind of decompress from my day and have that conversation. So we basically just kind of developed strategies around, creating time and, where we could, sit down and have a really engaged conversation that was meaningful rather than just kind of sitting there and mindlessly talking to one another. And it actually has benefited us a lot later on in life when that's not necessarily the situation where, I can tell her anything, she can tell me anything. And the conversations that we have are challenging, they're insightful, they're meaningful, and there's no one I love to have a deeper conversation with than her, because she comes from things from a completely different perspective than I do. She's not someone who loves fitness and physiology and psychology, but she has a very good inherent understanding of people, regardless of that. And hearing her perspective and how she perceives different environments and different interactions uh, really challenges my perception of those things, right? And keeps me aware that uh, we can see the same thing in entirely different lights, and draw different things out of it. And there's a lot of value for both of us within that process. And we give each other a lot of really great advice, I think both ways based on that. And we also do a really good job of listening to one another. And I think, being present is a huge thing in society today, talking about phones, talking about social media, talking about some of these mechanisms, when we're at home and it's family time, like the phones are in another room. We're engaged on our kids or engaged on one another, and we carve out the time and prioritize the time to do that. And that's something that I think started way back when, pre iPhone, in our first apartment, where we just knew that if we wanted to engage with one another, we wanted to be meaningful, and we could be really efficient with our time because we didn't have a lot of time, between the hours we were both working. And that led us to a lot of very open communication and a lot of directness that was kind of hard at the time as young people, but has really benefited us now that we've been together for 11 years, so it's been a great thing.
I like it. That's good. And it's a lot of like takeaways that people could walk away with. It's basically just communicate really, really well. Going into fatherhood, like there there's often times where people enter that phase of their life and they're going to have fears and doubts. Did you find that you had any of that? Were you pretty calm and collected?
I think fear is a hard word, but I was very anxious, and part of that was because I wanted to do so well, and the repercussions of not doing well are huge, right? Probably the biggest that we'll experience in our lives. So I don't know if fear is the right word, but there was a lot of anxiety. We had our oldest son. I was, gosh, 27. My wife was 25. So we were fairly young by New York standards. We were 10 years younger than most of the other parents that were having kids around the same time, and that was something that was it was a lot of pressure, but it was self imposed in the fact that it's I've always wanted to be a great father. That was something that's always been a driver for me, for my father, right? And so there's a lot of anxiety there, but it's ended up being the best experience of my life, and something that those are my two buddies. Like, those are my two best friends. I think they're the coolest kids in the world. They surprise me every day. I learn so many things from them and watching them interact with the world, and especially as they were growing up. I think understanding how children interact with their environments and with other people uh, can teach us all a very important lesson, because they come at those situations without any preconceived notions, without any bias, right? And they just do things they enjoy. They interact with people they like. They don't consider other aspects that we consider as adults, just based on our own experiences growing up. And watching them and hearing the things they say and listening to the observations that they have, it has been one of the greatest things that I've probably experienced over the last 8 years. Is just seeing them grow, and being a part of it. And like I said, I've got two little boys, and teaching them, and showing them that there's a lot of responsibility, especially in the world today, to being a man, right? And treating people with respect, and treating people as equals is a huge thing in our society, that doesn't always get portrayed in the right, in the positive light that we wish it was. And that's something that I just want to be as good of an example as I can with. And that's something that's really important to me, and something that my wife and I have made a priority is exposing them to as many different people as possible, people different from us, and different environments. They growing up in New York was a great experience, I think, for them. Now we live back in the Midwest, and it's definitely not as diverse, but we just do the best we can, and always try to portray the best possible example that we can for them.
I like it. How has being a father changed your leadership style?
I think it's turned me into a much more of a facilitator. I think, and I would hope that anybody that's worked for me in the past or worked with me in the past would agree with this. But the biggest thing that I felt I always had to offer to the people that worked for me when I was in a management or leadership role was, I really wanted to be able to provide them growth. And I wanted to be able to provide them opportunities to grow, both within a company and outside of it, both personally and professionally. And because I always knew that the more growth that people that worked under me had, the better off we were going to be from an organizational standpoint anyway. And I think being introverted has a lot to do with that. I've always been someone who is more in the background. If you would have looked at my social media profile, even a year and a half ago, it was private, and most of my pictures were cheeseburgers, my kids, and my dog, right? And I didn't really start driving my own social media until I started my own business. And I did that mainly because that's kind of my sole source of marketing, and how I draw most of the people that I draw from a business standpoint. But from a leadership standpoint, that's always been kind of my bread and butter, is kind of reverse engineering the process of organizational success, right? It's starting with the people that worked for me and ending at the company itself, and being able to provide support and autonomy and hopefully develop the skills that it took to be successful in their own rights later on down the road. So,
I like that. So I'm going to throw a word at you, and I need you to define it in a way that you feel creates the most growth or the most purpose for that word. And the word is failure. How do you define that in a way that people will take it in a way the right way?
I mean, failure is not a word I use a lot, and I mean, again, talking about our conversation, a few minutes ago, I've learned more and grown more through what others might consider as failure than I have through success, right? And I think to understand failure, you have to understand success, right? And you have to be able to provide a contrast between those two things. And that contrast is going to be defined by what you're really seeking from an outcome perspective. And I think people that are always looking for successes are looking for validation oftentimes. And they're really biased, in the ways that they go about things, right? And people that are looking, or failing or looking from growth from failure are looking for better ways to do things and looking for improvement. And I think there's definitely, whether you're talking about the fitness industry or you're just talking about life in general, there's a lot of people that skate through lives learning from their mistake, and end up being very successful because of that, because they find the things they shouldn't be doing, either organizationally or environmentally. And there's a lot of people that kind of just get by uh, through the same mechanisms, and the problem with, seeking out success and through validation is it eliminates critical thinking, right? And you eventually only know one way of doing things. And the people that are applauding you are just people with the same belief systems. And you're constantly, just kind of patting each other on the back, telling each other how successful you are and how great you are. But meanwhile, outside of your circle or your bubble, there's a whole world of people doing things differently, probably even more successfully, simply because they've been critically objective in their processes, and they've failed enough times to find the right ways to go about things, or ways that are more beneficial to them in the long run. So I don't use that word a lot. Um, simply because I don't see failure as a bad thing, and it kind of has a negative connotation. I think there's things that we're not successful within the scope that we're hoping for, or the aim that we're hoping for, but at the same time teach us a lot of things and teach us sometimes what not to do, which is oftentimes even more important than learning what to do, and or one way of doing things. So really roundabout, kind of went on a tangent, but I hope that makes sense.
No, it totally did. And I kind of figured that would be a word that would kind of like get you going a little bit, because it's the whole mindset. Like there is ways to see people in our lives. There is ways to see experiences in our lives, and the way in which we see those things can kind of direct our outcomes.
Hmm.
And so I think you and I are similar in the way that we don't call out failure per se. It's just like life experiences and redirections and lessons. And it's
Hmm.
so valuable to have that stance on things, because then you just move forward. You move forward in a different way. You move forward, you just forward.
Absolutely.
So my next question for you is, do you have like a big goal for your next 5 years? Is there something that you're aiming for, or is it more about just sustaining things in your day-to-day life?
No, I definitely have, a goal for growth. And, my from a professional standpoint, my business is going very well, and I'm meeting the metrics that I kind of set out, but I do want it to be scaled to a more organizational level. Um, right now, I've done a lot of consulting within fitness companies and fitness facilities, which is great. But I would, at the end of the day, it's kind of like helping the people that don't really need to be helped all that much sometimes. I work with them from a cultural, environmental standpoint, and that's very valuable. But I really think I can have a bigger impact on people as a whole if I, can get into corporate wellness and work within non-fitness related organizations. And that's why I'm actually currently in the graduate program I'm in. It's organizational psychology. and that will allow me to get more into the human resources side of things as well. So I can combine corporate wellness with environmental organization and working with clients from a cultural perspective as well as a fitness. Um, Personally, um, yeah, I just want to continue to kind of go the track I'm going. I'm like I said, from a family perspective, um, it just keeps getting better. Like I said, I've been married for 11 years, and uh, my relationship with my wife gets better every single year, if not every single month, or even sooner. And then as I'm watching my kids grow, I think that just gives me more opportunities to learn from them and to teach them, and kind of see what little adults they turn into be. And that's something that I'm just gonna try to be as present for as possible and not try to think too far in advance. Because I don't want to miss what's happening now to be planning for the future. And I think that's something that as young parents, I think we made the mistake of early on, is always looking for the next thing and the next milestone. You're kind of taught to do that, right? And now, as they're getting older, and they're forming their own personalities and their own thoughts and their own opinions and perceptions, it's really, man, it's really nice to just be able to sit back and watch what they do and observe them and interact with them and answer questions and offer feedback and insight, and just see what kind of naturally develops, and just be as present for that process as possible.
So, what are three ways that you kind of make sure that you are always present, no matter what week it is, no matter what time of the year?
Well, I organize my work in a way that, and again, this is might be kind of roundabout, but part of the reason that we moved here was, again, because I was working so many hours. I was working 70 to sometimes plus hours a week. And, we moved so I could work 30 to 35 hours a day, a week. And that's allowed me to organize my work and life to an extent to where I can leave when I step out of my office at home. Like, I leave work there for the most part, and I can always go back in the evenings once they're in bed to answer a few emails. But I really try to practice what I preach, as far as not necessarily delving into work related activities when I'm not within work related hours. So I try to be super organized with my time and really efficient with my time. I schedule an admin hours alongside my calls and make sure that I'm getting everything done that I need to do within that time, so that I can be more present outside of that time. And that's really helped a lot. I think number two is I just try to eliminate distractions as much as possible. We we didn't have, even in New Jersey, we didn't have a TV for the first 2 years that we lived there, and that was a great thing, until our kids kind of started getting made fun of at school because we were like the family with no TV. So we ended up eventually getting one, and kind of giving into a little bit of screen time here and there, just because they had no social awareness when it came to talking with their friends at school. But even now, we're very conscious about, what we expose our kids to and how often, so we try to limit screen time. We try to limit phone time, and we definitely try to leave the screens in another room when we're all together as a family. We eat dinner together every night. We read books before bed every night to the kids. Even when we do, bath time, right? It's just another opportunity to be together as a family. And that's something that I think, just not having, your phone out or your screen out or watching TV while you're interacting with your kids and your wife and whoever, is going to be really important towards that as well. And the other one is try to, we try to do different things. Like I said, we go hiking on the weekends. We go to the pool when it's nice. And I think just exposing them to different experiences allows the novelty to kind of, break away the mundane, right? And, the more novel we can make their experience, and the more, environments we can immerse them in, the more engaged they're going to be in the process as well. And the more engaged we're going to be, so I think also just kind of breaking the norms, and making sure that we're not just doing the same old thing all the time, that we're actually not entertaining them, but just exposing them to new things. And that could be just going to a different park, or going to a different playground, or going to the farmer's market one morning, riding our bikes on a different route, you know, going to a different trail to hike, going to a different pool, seeing different friends. We just want to make sure that we're always doing different things because that will also help keep us engaged in the process as well and keep it fun and exciting.
I like it. And it keeps with the whole like evolving and sort of that staying a little bit of stress, a new playground, like something a little unusual and makes them better people.
Yeah,
So I have a question that I ask all of my guests, and I usually compile all the answers together. And the question is, if you could give one piece of advice on how to authentically live your life to the fullest, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think it's identifying what that actually means. I think we all have a different perception of what living our life to the fullest is going to be. And I think, as we're growing up, we lose a lot of that perception based on social norms and based on obligations, and something that I work with a lot of the clients that I work with, they tend to work a lot, and then, I'll ask them, what they do for fun, right? And they'll say, I work out. And I'm like that's not a very well-rounded approach to life, right? So we always end up going back to the things that they did before fitness, before sports, before obligations. Like, what you do as a kid that you enjoyed, what you do just for enjoyment. What were you your best self at, right? And for some people that was music, or it was drawing, or it was running around in the woods, or it was kicking a soccer ball around. And something that I always try to make time for and try to encourage others to is to go back to something that replicates that feeling, right? And be a well-rounded human being. And I think when we start talking about identifying uh, ways to live life to the fullest and being the most authentic, we have to go back to our authentic selves, right? Which was probably early on in our lives, because at the end of the day, our responsibilities and our environments are going to shape us. And when I look at, and again, this is something that fatherhood has taught me, is when I look at my kids now, is they play what they want to play. They make up their own rules. They do things that they enjoy, not things that they're supposed to do. And when I watch them play, there's an authentic love for what they're doing, and they're immersed within it. Like, if my kids are playing Legos, like, they're in the zone, like they're enjoying it, right? And it's like a flow state for kids, and when I think about things that I like to do as a kid, I grew up in a pretty rural area, and I ran around in the woods for hours every weekend, or whenever in the summers when I was out of school. And now I try to replicate that as much as I can by making sure that I kind of start my day with a long walk, and I get sunshine, I get fresh air. I try to be present and be aware of my surroundings, and I get a lot of steps in, and that's usually where I do my best thinking, right? And I have kind of the best conversations with myself, and I really enjoy that process. And on days that I don't get to do it, I feel it, you know, and we try to walk in the evenings and do the same thing after dinner before bed as often as we can when the weather permits. And I think for in order to live your authentic self and be the best version of yourself, you have to actually define what those things are, because oftentimes otherwise we're just going to keep just trying to do the things we're currently doing better, which may be appropriate, but it may not be, based on what our experience have dictated.
I like that. That's a really good answer. So, if people are curious about you and they want to learn more, what's the best way to like figure out more about you or get a hold of you?
I mean, my website is an easy way to contact, and that's just compoundperformance.com. Social media, just messaging me on there is also a really easy way, on Instagram specifically. I'm not on Facebook much just because I want to kind of avoid all the other garbage that's on Facebook. And I
Totally.
also want to limit my social media time. So I kind of found that Instagram was a better platform for me. I could control my own consumption a lot better. So I've kind of stuck with that a little bit more. But messaging me on there is a super easy way to go about it. And that's just compound performance underscore. Somebody apparently had my name already, so I had to throw a little underscore underneath it. But yeah, I'm again, active enough on that. I can't guarantee a super fast response because I try to, put the phone up as often as possible. But I usually have a pretty good like 12-hour response window there. So
That's awesome. And I got to thank you again for being an honored guest on the podcast. It's been a great chat.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's been really fun.
Well, talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you.
So I hope that you got as much out of that as I did. It is really cool what can happen when you're just shooting the shit with somebody that you look up to. Communication is so helpful. Taking time to talk to people. So if you're listening to this still, I challenge you to take an hour to talk to somebody that you know nothing about. Take an hour to talk to them about things that matter, things outside of business, things outside of training, things that they find the most joy out of, and see what you learn. Because I find it helpful, so I'd imagine that you'd feel the same way to some extent. Thanks for listening.